Coming up later tonight, the first and perhaps the only presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Believe it or not, those two have never actually met or spoken to each other, and it's a high-stakes debate in a race that most polls show is a dead heat. So joining us to talk about it and the race in general, University of Utah political science professor Jim Curry. Jim, thanks for being here this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, let's talk about the current state of this race. Where do you see it right now?
So this race is incredibly close, just like every race for the president we've had in the last couple decades. The polling margins are usually within 1 or 2% between Harris and Trump. Harris tends to have a slight lead. But what's really important is that in the key swing states, places like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, Georgia, the race is essentially a statistical tie. So it's going to come down to the wire.
I find it fascinating that these two have never met each other. I don't know why. You would expect that they had somehow seen each other in some type of arena. So this is their first face-off here. What are you going to be watching for tonight?
What I'm going to be watching for is just how both candidates get started in the debate, first and foremost. Like you said, they've never faced off before. This is new for both of them. Harris is still new to the race, and we want to see what's the first punch that each throws at each other. Does Harris try to rattle Trump? Does Trump try to tie Harris to the Biden administration or come in with some sort of personal attack? Who's going to set the tone is what I'm going to be looking for to start off.
Well, let's talk about each candidate individually. What do you think Vice President Kamala Harris needs to do to prove her case?
I think Harris needs to do two things. I think first she needs to give people a reason to see her as a credible alternative to Trump that is not just Biden 2.0, just a little bit younger. There's a lot of people that have misgivings about how things went during the Biden administration, particularly around inflation and prices and cost of living. Can she show that she can take us somewhere different in a credible way?
Okay.
And can she rattle Trump and get voters to remember the things they don't like about him?
Okay.
So people might remember things about the Trump administration in those years pre-COVID that they liked about their lives, but a lot of voters have misgiving about Trump the person, and can she bring those things to the forefront?
Okay. What does Trump need to do to prove his case?
Trump needs to find a consistent mode of attack and consistent messaging about why voters should give him a second term and not Harris. Trump was doing quite well giving people a reason to vote for him and not Biden, but now facing a different candidate, he's really struggled to find a consistent message. And so tonight's going to be a big moment for him to see if he can come through with that message or not.
I think most people are familiar with how presidential races usually turn out in Utah. We're not a battleground state, but give us the state of the race in Utah, where things stand, if there have been any polling numbers or anything like that here.
It's been very little polling, and I think that tends to be the case with states no one expects to be competitive. But from what little there has been done, it seems like it's a lot like 2020 again, where Trump is polling around 50%, and you can probably expect him to do a little bit better than that, which means he's still doing historically poorly in this state, in a state that has in the past supported presidential nominees on the Republican side at 60 or 70%, but certainly not anywhere within the realm of this being a place where Harris could steal a victory.
And so Trump has been, correct me if I'm wrong, fairly unpopular in a red state like Utah then. Has that popularity increased, though, over the years from 2016?
It increased between 2016 and 2020, that's for sure.
Okay.
Trump did quite poorly in the 2016 election, and polled very poorly. And it went up several percent, about 10, 12% between 2016 and 2020, but he seems to be stuck about that point.
Okay. What do you see as different about this race, if anything, than some of the races we've seen over the past 2 decades?
The identities of the candidates are different, right? Vice President Harris is certainly an historical nominee in a lot of senses. Donald Trump is trying to become only the second president in American history to lose the White House and then win it back. He's a rare candidate who's won his party nomination 3 times. All those things are unique, but the environment, the general race, looks remarkably similar to every race we've seen since about 2000. It's really close. We don't know who's going to win, and there's only a handful of states that really are going to decide the outcome. And that's like deja vu. So the people are different, but the race is kind of the same.
You've mentioned polling at the beginning of this interview. So what's up with polling? What does it show? We've had polling errors in the past where Trump support has been underrepresented. So what do you think is the state of the polling industry right now, and how much stock should we be putting in those numbers?
So polling in a really tight race is really hard to do. That's a lot of what's drawn this attention to it in recent years. Yes, in 2016 and 2020, polling error was sort of in favor of Trump. But in 2022, the polling error was in favor of the Democrats. They outperformed their polls in the midterm. What we can expect is that every single time there's going to be some error, because polling is built in with some level of expected error. It's just that when the race is really, really close, even being off by 1% can mean you thought one person was going to win and you get the other. So what you should do is you should take polls with a little bit of a grain of salt and expect that if they tell you Harris has 49% support, that really means it could be anywhere from about 45% to 53%, and that's about how much certainty you should give it.
Okay, so in the beginning, when it was Trump and Biden, it was relatively recognized that these were two unpopular candidates. One of them is gone now, but we're still at a tied race. So what does that say about anything?
That says that you just have a really limited amount of movement you can get out of a lot of voters in this country. Most voters really feel much more strongly towards one side or the other, or perhaps really don't like one side or the other. So there's a really limited amount of swing voters you can really get. Replacing Biden with Harris brought some voters back to the Democratic side who tend to vote Democratic and were kind of demoralized and weren't super excited about voting for Biden. But it just brings us back to exactly where we were in 2020, in 2016, in 2012, and on and on.
Okay. You'll be watching tonight, though.
I will be.
Okay. Thank you. University of Utah political science professor Jim Curry talking about tonight's presidential debate. Ron, I'll send it back over to you.